The hall was not meant for silence. It was designed for declarations, for verdicts spoken aloud, for power displayed in measured ritual. Gold-lit arches rose high above the assembled court, each one carved with the victories of 1,000 years. Chandeliers of floating crystal hummed softly, reacting to the presence of royal blood. Even the air carried expectation, an ancient pressure that weighed on every visitor who was not born to it. Ethan Vale felt that weight immediately. He stood exactly where he had been instructed to stand. 3 steps behind the marked line, hands relaxed at his sides, posture neutral. A human diplomatic adjunct, temporary assignment, replaceable, invisible, that was the plan. It failed the moment the sisters entered. They walked together, synchronized not by training but by something older, an instinct refined through shared survival. The court rose in a single motion. Armor plates shifted, jewelry chimed. No announcement followed. None was needed. The first wore gold. Her crown was slender, elegant, its emerald inlays catching the warm light and bending it to her will. Her armor was immaculate, black metal etched with ceremonial geometry, every surface polished, every edge controlled. She did not scan the room. She already knew everyone in it. Queen-designate Aurelian Valcara, first daughter of the High Throne. Her gaze passed over Ethan without pause. The second wore silver. Not ceremonial silver, but something colder, lunar, edged with blue crystal that pulsed faintly as she moved. Her armor was open at the collar, defiant in its refusal to hide strength or form. Her crown sat heavier on her brow, less refined, more ancient, as if it had been reclaimed rather than bestowed. Caris Valcara, the unacknowledged sister, the problem the court preferred not to name. Her eyes stopped on Ethan, not for long. Not obviously, but long enough. The crystal lights above flickered once. No one else noticed. Aurelian took her place at the center dais, hands resting lightly on the railing. Her expression was calm, composed, regal in the way only those raised inside inevitability could be. "Begin," she said. The court resumed its breathing. Reports followed. Formalities. Controlled exchanges of power disguised as courtesy. Ethan translated when required, his voice steady, precise. He had done this before, stood in rooms where human presence was tolerated but never trusted. What he had not done before was feel the pressure shift. Caris had not taken the secondary seat prepared for her. She stood instead, just off the dais, close enough to be seen as aligned, far enough to remain separate. The court pretended not to notice. That, Ethan realized, was the true tension. Not open hostility, but deliberate avoidance. Midway through the proceedings it happened. Aurelian paused, not dramatically, just long enough for protocol to hesitate. Her eyes turned not to Caris, not to the ministers, but downward, to Ethan. "You," she said. One word, flat, unemotional. The room froze. Ethan felt it then, the sudden, total attention of 1,000 eyes. He stepped forward exactly 1 pace, heart controlled, expression neutral. "Yes, your radiance." Aurelian studied him, as if he were a variable introduced into a closed equation. "You were present at the border incident on Viral Station." "Yes." "You authored the report that delayed military response by 8 minutes." "Yes." A murmur rippled through the court. 8 minutes was an eternity. "And in those 8 minutes," Aurelian continued, "you chose not to warn us." Ethan did not look away. "Correct." "Explain." He inhaled once. "Because immediate intervention would have triggered Kalari escalation. Civilian loss estimates exceeded 30%. Waiting reduced casualties to under 5. Silence pressed harder. Aurelian's lips curved, not in approval, not in anger, calculation. "You chose lives over protocol." "Yes." She held his gaze. "That is not a human norm." Before Ethan could answer, Caris spoke. "He's lying." The word cut clean through the chamber. Heads turned. Shock rippled. Caris stepped forward, silver crown catching the light. "He didn't choose lives over protocol," she said calmly. "He chose responsibility over permission." Her eyes met Ethan's fully now. "That," she added, "is far more dangerous." The crystal chandeliers flared. Aurelian straightened slowly, and for the first time since entering the hall, the sisters looked at each other, not as rivals, as equals standing at the edge of something irreversible. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with calculation. Aurelian did not react immediately. That alone unsettled the court. A queen-in-waiting was expected to assert, to restore balance when it tilted. But balance, Ethan realized, was exactly what had been disturbed, and she was deciding whether to correct it or exploit it. "You speak freely for someone without a seat," Aurelian said at last, her voice smooth. Karis smiled faintly. "I speak freely because I was never given one." A ripple of restrained discomfort passed through the ministers. This was not the arena for grievances. It was the arena for appearances. Aurelian's gaze returned to Ethan. "Step forward." He obeyed. The marked line on the floor, old, ceremonial, glowed softly as he crossed it. Human boots were not meant to activate royal glyphs. The glow deepened anyway. That drew attention. Aurelian noticed. Karis definitely noticed. "You understand," Aurelian said, "that your action altered interstellar timelines." "Yes." "You understand that you exceeded your authority." "Yes." "And you would do it again." Ethan did not hesitate. "Yes." The answer landed cleanly, too clean. Karis exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh. "There it is." Aurelian tilted her head. "What?" "The part where he becomes a liability," Karis replied. "Not because he disobeyed, but because he won't stop." Aurelian studied Ethan with renewed interest. "You're not afraid." "I am," he said. "I'm just not confused." That earned him something unexpected. Aurelian's smile this time was real. "Remove the chamber," she said. The command was ancient. Absolute. The chandeliers dimmed. Sound dampened. The court faded, not physically but functionally, sealed behind a privacy veil keyed to royal blood signatures. Only 3 figures remained relevant. Aurelian stepped down from the dais. Up close her presence was heavier, controlled gravity. Every movement deliberate, every expression curated through decades of expectation. "You placed yourself between 2 inevitabilities," she said quietly. "War and my sister." Karis crossed her arms. "Don't flatter him, he didn't know I existed." "I suspected," Ethan said. Both women looked at him. "You suspected what?" Karis asked. "That someone was being excluded on purpose," he said. "Systems don't avoid mentioning variables, unless those variables matter." Aurelian's eyes narrowed. "You read absence." "I read pressure," Ethan replied. Something in the diplomatic data kept bending around an empty space. Karis's smile vanished. "That empty space has a name," she said softly. Aurelian's tone sharpened. "Enough." She turned to Ethan. "You've now been acknowledged by both of us. That alone places you outside human jurisdiction." Ethan felt the weight of that settle. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Aurelian said. "You no longer belong entirely to anyone." Karis stepped closer, her voice dropped, "including yourself." Aurelian extended a hand, not in invitation, not in threat, a formal gesture of binding attention. "You will remain," she said, "as observer." Karis's eyes flashed. "As leverage." "As balance," Aurelian corrected. Ethan looked between them, gold and silver, law and disruption, certainty and truth. "I'm not neutral," he said quietly. Aurelian's brows rose. "You will be." Karis leaned in, close enough that only he could hear. "You already chose," she whispered. "You just don't know which future noticed." The privacy veil began to lift. Aurelian withdrew her hand. "The court will reconvene. You will stand where I place you." "And where is that?" Ethan asked. She smiled, composed once more. "Between us." The chandeliers flared. Standing between them felt wrong in a way Ethan could not quantify. Not dangerous. Danger he understood. This was something else. A distortion. As if the floor beneath his boots was subtly misaligned with the rest of reality, tilted just enough to make balance a conscious act. The court pretended composure. Ministers resumed their places. Advisors adjusted their robes. Guards shifted weight with ritual precision. but the geometry of the room had changed. Two thrones had always implied hierarchy. Now, with a human placed between gold and silver, the implication fractured. Aurelian spoke first. "The Valkara succession will proceed as codified," she announced. "There will be no deviation." A murmur of approval followed. Relief mostly. Karis did not react. Ethan felt it again, that pressure, subtle but unmistakable. The air tightened near her, the faint hum of her crown sharpening as if responding to restraint rather than command. Aurelian continued. "However, recent variables have emerged. Variables require calibration." Her eyes shifted to Ethan without fully acknowledging him. Effective immediately, human adjunct Ethan Vale is reassigned. Reassigned. That word rippled louder than any protest. "To what function?" asked Chancellor Oryx, carefully neutral. Aurelian paused just long enough to make the answer unavoidable. "Witness." The word struck differently in this chamber, not passive, not symbolic. In Valkara law, a witness was a stabilizing element, one whose presence altered outcomes simply by being seen. Karis finally moved. "A witness," she said softly, "is only useful if both sides accept the risk of being known." Aurelian met her gaze. "Do you refuse?" Karis smiled, slow and sharp. "No, I welcome it." Ethan turned slightly toward her. That wasn't the question. Her eyes flicked to him. Something unreadable passed there, surprise perhaps. Or recognition. "You're learning," she said. The proceedings dragged on, but nothing meaningful was decided. Every motion now bent around the space Ethan occupied. He could feel the ministers watching him without looking, recalculating what it meant for a human to hear what had never been meant for human cognition. When the session finally adjourned, the court dispersed in disciplined silence. Aurelian did not dismiss Ethan. Karis did not leave. The hall emptied until only the three of them remained once more, the chandeliers dimmed to a softer glow. No privacy veil this time. Just distance. Aurelian turned first. "You will be assigned quarters within the inner ring." Karis laughed. "You're putting him where the walls listen." "Every wall listens," Aurelian replied. "Some are simply honest about it." She faced Ethan fully now. "You will not speak of what you hear here." "I wouldn't know how," he said. "Human language isn't built for half of this." That earned him a look, brief, assessing. Kara stepped closer, boots echoing lightly. "She's right about one thing. You're no longer external." "And wrong about another," Aurelian said coolly. "He is not yours." Karis tilted her head. "I never said he was." Their eyes locked. Ethan felt the space between them tighten again, not with hostility but with something older, unfinished. Aurelian broke it first. "Rest," she told Ethan. "Tomorrow you observe the preparatory council." "And after that," he asked. Aurelian's expression did not change. "After that, we see which future adjusts." She turned and left, gold crown catching the light one last time before the doors sealed behind her. Karis remained. For a moment, she said nothing. Then quietly, "You shouldn't have survived this long." "Neither should you," Ethan replied, her lips curved. "Fair." She stepped closer until the hum of her crown vibrated faintly against his awareness. "They think this is about succession," she said. "It is." He met her gaze. "Then what is it about?" She studied him, not as a variable, not as leverage, as a choice. "Exposure," she said. "And what happens when systems built on silence are forced to be seen?" She turned away, silver on. Ethan did not sleep. The quarters assigned to him were elegant in the way only alien architecture could be. Curved walls, ambient light tuned to circadian rhythms he did not possess, silence engineered rather than natural. The bed adjusted itself to his weight. The room learned him. That was the problem. He could feel the palace watching, not through cameras, not through guards, but through inference. Systems mapping micro-movements, biometric variance, decision latency. Observation layered upon observation. Witnesses were not meant to be comfortable. Sometime during the artificial night cycle, the light shifted. Not brighter, colder. Ethan sat up immediately. She did not enter through the door. Karis emerged from the wall itself. silver crown dimmed, armor replaced with a simpler configuration that still carried authority in every line. The wall sealed behind her without a sound. "You're either very brave," Ethan said quietly, "or very reckless." She smiled faintly. "Those categories overlap more than my sister admits. You shouldn't be here." "I know." She moved closer, unhurried. The room reacted, light recalibrating, surfaces tightening their glow as if attempting to compensate for her presence. "You felt it today," she said. "The shift." "Yes." "Good, that means you're not blind." Ethan studied her now without the distance of ceremony. Up close, her composure was different from Aurelian's. Less polished, more earned. There were microscars in her armor plating, faint energy burns repaired rather than replaced. "You were trained for this court," he said, "just not allowed to finish." Her expression stilled, careful. "Truth isn't an accusation," he replied. "It's a pattern." She watched him for a long moment, then nodded once. "They trained me to rule a future that frightened them, so they archived me instead. And now, she said softly, they pretend the archive doesn't still run." She turned, gesturing to the walls. "Aurelian believes balance is maintained by containment. I believe balance requires exposure. And I'm the exposure." "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "That's a dangerous role." Kara stepped closer, stopping just short of him. "Dangerous for whom?" "For you," he said, "for her." "And for you," she corrected. "You're human, that makes you unpredictable." "Because I don't belong." "Because you do," she said quietly. "And no one planned for that." The light flickered again, this time sharply. Kara stiffened. "They're listening more closely now," she murmured. "I should go." "Why come at all?" Ethan asked. She met his eyes. "Because tomorrow, the preparatory council will ask questions they are not allowed to hear the answers to. And you want me ready. I want you aware." She paused at the wall, then glanced back. "Aurelian thinks she's protecting the throne. And you. I'm protecting what comes after it." She dissolved into the wall once more, leaving the room colder than before. The next cycle came too quickly. Ethan was escorted to the inner chamber, smaller than the main hall, older, its walls etched with equations instead of victories. This was where futures were tested before being permitted to exist. Aurelian was already there. "You were visited," she said without preamble. Ethan did not deny it. "You should know," she continued, "that my sister believes truth alone can stabilize systems. And you don't. I believe truth must be timed." She stepped closer, gaze intent. "Tell me, witness, what did you feel yesterday when you stood between us?" Ethan considered. "Pressure," he said, "not conflict, alignment, strain." Her eyes sharpened. "Explain." "You're not opposing forces," he said. "You're parallel ones being forced into a single outcome." Silence, then quietly, "That is a dangerous interpretation." "It's also accurate." Aurelian held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned. The preparatory council chamber was not circular. That alone told Ethan everything. Valkara design favored symmetry, circles for unity, spirals for continuity, lines only for transition. This room was angular, purposefully asymmetrical. Each wall slanted at a different incline, etched with living equations that shifted as observers entered, recalibrating probabilities in real time. This was where futures were stress-tested. Aurelian entered first, gold crown steady, presence anchoring the room. The equations brightened in response to her bloodline signature, stabilizing into recognizable patterns. Karis arrived moments later. The equations hesitated. Not failure, conflict. The room could accommodate one inevitable future at a time. Two caused interference. Ethan stepped in last. The equation spiked. Not toward instability, toward resolution. Several counselors stiffened. One of them, a tall, thin figure whose voice carried statistical authority, spoke carefully. "The witness alters projection density." Aurelian inclined her head. "That is his function." Karis folded her arms. "Or his consequence." The council began. Scenarios unfolded along the walls. succession outcomes, alliance probabilities, civil fracture thresholds. In every projection where Aurelian ruled alone, stability remained, at the cost of stagnation. Expansion slowed. Innovation declined. The empire endured, but it hardened. In every projection where Charis was acknowledged openly, growth surged, followed by violent correction. External powers reacted. Internal factions panicked. Change invited fire. Then the room recalibrated. A third pattern emerged, one that had not existed before. Ethan felt it before he saw it, the pressure shifting again, not toward either sister but around him. The equations bent, forming a connective structure that threaded gold and silver into something continuous. The council went silent. This outcome was not authorized, one counselor said. Aurelian stared at the projection. It wasn't possible. Charis smiled slowly. It is now. The pattern showed neither sister dominant. It showed co-rule, not ceremonial, functional, dynamic. Two authorities operating in deliberate tension, checked, exposed, adaptive. And always, a human presence at the axis. The witness remains, the equation whispered in translated glyphs. Observation enforces coherence. Aurelian's jaw tightened. This is unacceptable. Charis turned to her. Is it? Or is it simply uncontrollable? Aurelian's gaze flicked to Ethan. You did this. No, he said quietly. You did, I just made it visible. The council erupted, voices layered with alarm, reverence, fear. Futures were not meant to surprise the Valkyra. They were meant to be selected. Aurelian raised a hand. Silence fell immediately. This council will recess, she declared. All projections archived, no dissemination. Charis stepped forward. You can't unsee it. I can contain it, Aurelian replied. Charis's voice softened. For how long? Aurelian did not answer. The room dimmed. The equations receded, but Ethan could still feel them, etched now into memory, into possibility. As the council dispersed, Aurelian remained behind. So, she said at last, you are not neutral after all. I never was, Ethan replied. I'm human. She studied him, not as a variable now, not as a tool. As a risk she could no longer remove. You force convergence, she said. That makes you dangerous. Charis stepped beside him, close, deliberate. It makes him necessary. Aurelian's eyes moved between them. For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed her face. The throne was never meant to be shared, she said. Charis nodded. Neither was the future. The chamber door sealed. And somewhere deep within the palace, systems designed for singular authority began quietly rewriting themselves, adjusting to a reality that no longer fit into one crown. Ethan exhaled slowly. The fault line had shifted. It had become a fact. The palace did not rebel. That was the first sign something fundamental had changed. No alarms sounded. No emergency protocols engaged. The Valkyra systems, ancient, layered, self-correcting, absorbed the new projections without open resistance. Instead, they adapted quietly, rerouting authority pathways, redistributing access hierarchies, rewriting assumptions buried so deep no living ruler remembered authorizing them. Aurelian noticed first. She stood alone in the observation gallery above the inner ring, watching data streams flow across the air like translucent veins. Gold crowned steady, hands clasped behind her back. They're adjusting to you, she said without turning. Ethan stood a respectful distance away. To the outcome. To the disruption, she corrected. Then after a pause, to my sister. Charis leaned against a column nearby, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Funny how systems only admit alternatives after they're proven inevitable. Aurelian finally turned. Her gaze was sharp but tired in a way only responsibility could carve. You wanted exposure, she said to Charis. You have it. Yes, Charis replied. And you wanted control. You still have more than you admit. Silence stretched, not hostile, not comfortable, transitional. Aurelian's eyes moved to Ethan. The council will not accept this easily. They don't have to, he said. They just have to fail at stopping it. That earned him a look, part irritation, part reluctant respect. You've changed the way this palace calculates risk, Aurelian said. It now accounts for conscience. Karis smiled faintly. Careful, that almost sounded like approval. Do not mistake adaptation for affection, Aurelian replied. I won't, Karis said. I've survived without it. Aurelian's expression softened, just barely. That was never my intent. Karis studied her, then nodded once. Not forgiveness, acknowledgement. A chime echoed through the gallery, low, resonant. The court is convening, Aurelian said. They will demand clarification. They'll get ambiguity, Karis said. It's what they deserve. Aurelian stepped toward the exit, then paused. Ethan. Yes, you understand what position you occupy now. I understand, he said. I can't leave. And if I stay, he continued, I will be seen. Aurelian met his gaze fully. Seen as what? He glanced briefly at Karis, then back to Aurelian. As the point where you stop pretending this is a temporary deviation. Karis laughed softly. Welcome to permanence. The court chamber was fuller than before. Word had spread, not details but pressure. Ministers spoke in lowered tones. Advisors avoided eye contact with the center of the room, where the space between the two thrones now felt intentional. Aurelian took her seat. Karis did not take the secondary position. She stood beside the primary dais. The murmur swelled, then died as Aurelian raised her hand. The Valkara succession proceeds, she said clearly, with amendment. That word landed like a controlled detonation. There will be no singular crown, she continued. There will be no erasure of lineage. Authority will be shared, not diluted. Outrage stirred, fear, awe. Aurelian's voice did not waver. The witness remains. Ethan felt every eye turn toward him again. But this time something had changed. Not suspicion, recognition. Karis stepped forward. This is not compromise, she said. It is correction. Silence followed. Then slowly the palace responded. Not with applause, not with rebellion, with recalibration. The chandeliers shifted hue, gold and silver blending into a spectrum neither had produced alone. The floor glyphs realigned, no longer pointing toward a single apex but forming a stable triadic geometry. Aurelian inhaled once. Karis exhaled. And Ethan felt it, the pressure easing, not because tension had vanished but because it finally had somewhere to go. The future had stopped resisting observation. For the first time in Valkara history, it was being negotiated in the open. Ethan stood between two queens, not as mediator. The aftermath did not arrive as chaos. It arrived as questions. They surfaced first in private corridors, then in encrypted transmissions, then in the careful language of allied courts that pretended curiosity while recalculating threat matrices. Valkara had altered a constant. The galaxy noticed when constants moved. Ethan felt it in the days that followed, not as ceremony but as weight. He was no longer escorted everywhere. That was worse. Autonomy inside a palace like this meant exposure. Eyes followed him openly now, not hostile, assessing. He had become a reference point, something to be measured against, not removed. Aurelian adapted fastest. She began treating the new structure as if it had always been inevitable. Orders flowed through revised channels. Councils split, then rejoined. Where resistance surfaced, she redirected it into process, bureaucracy as a sedative. Control refined. Karis changed differently. She walked openly through spaces once denied her, training halls, strategic archives, public terraces overlooking the lower city. She spoke less in chambers and more in corridors, where listening was accidental and therefore honest. The people noticed. Not loyalty, recognition. Ethan found her one cycle later on the eastern balcony, armor absent, silver crown resting in her hands rather than on her head. Below them, the city pulsed, light and motion braided together in organic complexity no council chamber could ever fully model. "You're thinking about leaving," she said without turning. "I'm thinking about whether I'm allowed to," he replied. She looked at him then. "You always were." That's not what I meant. She smiled faintly. I know. He leaned on the railing beside her. You don't need me forever. No, she agreed, but not because this is stable. Because, because stability isn't the point, she said. Visibility is. Aurelian joined them moments later, gold crown catching the citylite. She stopped at Ethan's other side, completing the geometry without comment. The outer courts are requesting clarification, she said. They want definitions. Kara snorted. They always do. And we will give them, Aurelian continued. None that can be weaponized. Her gaze settled on Ethan. You will be cited as advisory presence only. Only, Karis echoed, amused. Ethan met Aurelian's eyes. You're protecting me. I am protecting the structure, she said. Then, after a pause, and the variable that holds it. Silence fell, not strain, settled. You know, Karis said, resting the silver crown against her palm, they're already telling stories. Aurelian arched a brow. Of course they are. Some say the human was chosen, Karis continued. Some say he manipulated us. Some say he's a test the Empire failed centuries ago and is finally retaking. And which do you prefer? Ethan asked. Karis considered. None, stories calcify, let them stay confused. Aurelian nodded once. Confusion buys time. The city lights shifted subtly, responding to internal realignments. Transport lanes rerouted, governance nodes updated, access permissions rewritten. Change without spectacle. Ethan exhaled. So this is it, he said, the future. Karis smiled. A version of it. Aurelian looked out over the city. She would no longer rule alone. For now. They stood there, gold, silver, and human. No longer a fault line, not yet a myth. Just three figures refusing to pretend the old shape of power still held. The first crisis arrived quietly. No fleets. No ultimatums. No public outrage. Just a message. It came from the Visari Compact. An old power, older even than Valkara, whose governance model depended on singular authority encoded as divine mandate. Their transmission was polite, formal, and unmistakably precise. They requested a demonstration, not of military strength, not of diplomatic unity, of legitimacy. They want proof this isn't theater, Karis said, reading the decoded layers. They believe shared authority is a temporary instability. They believe instability always collapses, Aurelian added, because theirs would. Ethan stood between them as he always did now, not positioned, not instructed, simply present. They're afraid, he said. Aurelian nodded. Fear framed as inquiry, a classic. They won't accept declarations, Karis said. They'll want something irreversible. Silence followed. Then Aurelian spoke the word no one had yet allowed themselves to say. Succession. Karis turned sharply. You can't mean. I do, Aurelian said calmly. Not replacement, definition. Her gaze shifted to Ethan. You, she continued, were never meant to exist in our models. That makes you ideal. For what? Ethan asked. For witnessing something no system can walk back, Karis answered slowly, understanding dawning. A choice. Aurelian inclined her head. A public one. The ceremony was announced within the cycle. No crowns exchanged. No oaths rewritten. Just a single moment added to tradition, an anomaly folded into ritual so precisely it could never be removed without tearing the whole structure apart. The Visari observers watched remotely. So did dozens of others. Ethan stood before the twin sigils of Valkara, gold and silver projected into the air, rotating slowly, waiting for alignment. Aurelian spoke first. I affirm authority shared by necessity, she said. By continuity, by law. Karis followed. I affirm authority shared by truth, she said. By exposure, by consent. The sigils hesitated. They did not merge. They awaited something else. All eyes turned to Ethan. He felt the weight then, not pressure, not fear, responsibility without instruction. He stepped forward. I affirm neither, he said quietly. Shock rippled. I affirm observation, he continued. The right of systems to be seen, while they decide who they become. The sigils flared. Not gold, not silver. A spectrum. The palace responded instantly, architecture recalibrating, authority pathways locking into the new configuration permanently. No override appeared, no contingency activated, the future committed. The Vasari transmission cut abruptly. Minutes later, a second message arrived, shorter, stripped of ceremony. They withdrew their inquiry. Across the palace, something ancient released its grip. Karis exhaled, slow and unguarded. Aurelian closed her eyes for just a fraction of a second, long enough to acknowledge the cost. Later, on the same balcony where it had begun, the three of them stood again. "So," Karis said lightly, "you just redefined succession law without holding a title." Ethan smiled faintly. "I watched you do it." Aurelian looked at the city below, alive, adapting, unafraid of complexity. "History will argue over what you are." "Let it," Karis said. "Arguments mean it survived." Ethan rested his hands on the railing. "I won't stay forever." Aurelian nodded. "No witness ever does." "But while you do," Karis added, meeting his eyes, "nothing collapses quietly." The city lights pulsed, gold and silver no longer competing, no longer separate, just coexisting.